weights drop down into 80% and even 70 percentile, that can mean one of a few different things. First off, the bass could be overcrowded and there's too much competition. It could also mean that there's not enough forage fish. It could also mean poor water quality, things like the low dissolved oxygen, or some imbalances with pH, nutrient loads, and things of that nature. And I've even heard that too much aquatic vegetation will keep a bass pond from reaching that 100 percentile. So a lot of good information comes from this chart, and it's told me that we're doing good in some areas. And one of the things I think some pond owners fail to do is add enough forage food for the fish. And as you guys have seen in our previous videos, we even went outside of the box and looked for some uncommon food like the prawns. So the benefit of the prawns is it's a great protein snack. The one downside is that it's such a small portion of the year, usually about 2 or 3 months in the fall, but it is a good kick that helps them get through the winter. The other really good food source we added to the pond was the tilapia. Again, the baby tilapia won't feed the bass all year long, usually from around June through about January, so 6 or 7 months. But last year the bass fed on the tilapia more than any other bait. And they also help out with algae control, so it's good all around. And the last bait source we'll talk about are threadfin shad, and these are much more complicated than I initially expected. So one mistake I made as a new pond owner, I thought, okay, when you stock 10,000 shad, that's going to feed your bass a long time. Well, I was wrong. So bass will go through 10,000 threadfin shad quick, and a bass has to eat 10 pounds of forage to grow 1 pound. So I quickly learned that when you stock the threadfin shad, you don't want those to get eaten, you want them to multiply, and you want to see 100,000 shad in the pond rather than 10,000, and that's what'll feed these bass throughout the entire year. On a side note, I just realized that means the goat has eaten over 40 pounds of bait fish himself. Probably closer to 50 or 60, which is incredible. Which is why you need a self-sustaining forage fish like the threadfin shad. And so that's where things get complicated. So a threadfin shad's only source of food is phytoplankton. And the only way you're going to get phytoplankton in a pond is to fertilize it. And that led to some other mistakes that we made, especially in our first year. So during our very first winter, once the temps dropped below freezing, our pond water actually got crystal clear, which isn't necessarily a harm, but what that allowed is the sunlight to penetrate all the way to the bottom and allowed filamentous algae to grow throughout the entire pond. So when the next spring rolled around, not knowing any better, I fertilized the pond. And instead of that fertilizer creating a good plankton bloom, all it did was feed all of that filamentous algae. So we had an abundance of algae, no plankton bloom, and what I've since learned from that is that you have to get rid of the algae first before fertilizing. And when it's taken over your whole pond, you can't use chemicals, so the best way to do that is to starve it out with some beneficial bacteria that'll outcompete it for its food source. So this past spring, I learned from my mistake the year prior, and we treated all the algae before fertilizing, and that created a new problem for us, and that's when all that filamentous algae died.